My girlfriend thinks I'm Korean, but I'm a K-pop fan who got plastic surgery. Back in college, I was obsessed with BTS. I had every album and knew all the choreography. I even started wearing the same style clothes as them and tried to dye my hair blonde like Jimin. The obsession got so bad, I flew out to Korea and got 3 procedures done. Rhinoplasty to slim down my nose, jaw reduction to get that V-shaped face, double eyelid surgery to change my eye shape. By the time it was done, I looked exactly like I dreamed about. So much so that people even started speaking to me in Korean at the grocery store. I met Hannah on Hinge 2 years after the last surgery. My BTS phase had mostly faded by then, but I still had the face to prove it happened. Her first message asked if I was Korean, and without thinking I said yes. It felt easier than explaining the whole embarrassing truth about my college obsession. She was so excited to match with another Korean person in our small college town. Our first 3 dates were perfect. She took me to her favorite Korean restaurant, and I just ordered whatever she suggested. When she asked about my family, I said they lived in Seoul, and we had a complicated relationship. Not a total lie, since my Italian parents were still pretty upset about my face. She believed everything, because why would anyone lie about something so stupid? The lies started piling up fast. I told her my Korean name was Park Jun-ho, which I stole from a drama I watched freshman year. When she asked why I went by Joey, I said it was easier for Americans to pronounce. She thought that was so thoughtful of me. Hannah's best friend, So-min, was actually Korean and wanted to hang out all the time. I kept making excuses about work whenever she invited us to Korean movie nights or pojangmatcha dinners. Everything got more complicated when Hannah signed us up for couples cooking classes at the Korean Community Center. I tried to get out of it, but she'd already paid and was so excited to learn traditional dishes together. The instructor spoke mostly Korean and expected me to translate for Hannah. I just nodded and repeated whatever motions everyone else was doing. When the teacher asked me direct questions, I pretended to be shy. The worst part was how much research I had to spend hours memorizing Korean food names and studying holiday traditions on Wikipedia. I learned enough phrases to fool Hannah, but actual Korean people always looked at me weird. 6 months into dating, Hannah wanted to visit Korea together. She'd been saving money and found cheap flights for winter break. She showed me her itinerary full of temples and palaces and meeting my family. I made up a story about my parents traveling to Italy that month to visit relatives. She offered to change the dates, but I said they'd be gone all winter. Her face fell, but she didn't push it. Things started unraveling at her company's holiday party. Her boss was this older Korean woman who owned an import business. She took one look at me and started rapid-firing questions in Korean. When I just smiled and nodded, she turned to Hannah with this confused expression. She said something that made Hannah's cheeks turn red. Later, Hannah told me her boss asked why I was pretending not to understand Korean. After that night, Hannah got suspicious about everything. She'd randomly test me by asking for translations of signs or menus. She'd play Korean music and watch my reaction to see if I knew the songs. Once she pretended to hurt herself and yelled something in Korean to see if I'd naturally respond. I just stared at her blankly and she looked so disappointed. The paranoia was eating me alive. I started avoiding mirrors because looking at my surgically altered face reminded me of the lie I was living. My parents hadn't seen me in over a year because I couldn't handle their comments about my appearance. I'd turned myself into someone else and now I was trapped pretending to be from a culture I'd only experienced through TV shows. Everything exploded at Lunar New Year dinner with her extended family. Her aunt had prepared this huge traditional meal, and everyone was sharing childhood memories. When they got to me, I panicked and told some story about celebrating in Seoul that I'd read online. Her cousin, who actually grew up there, started asking specific questions about my neighborhood and school. I was drowning in my own lies. Hannah saved me by changing the subject, but I could see doubt all over her face. On the drive home, she was completely silent. When we got to her apartment, she pulled out her phone and showed me something that made my heart stop. It was a Reddit post from my old roommate with photos from our dorm room. The walls were covered in BTS posters, and there I was with my old face doing the fake love choreography. She scrolled to the comments where someone had written, "Yo, isn't that Joey Marcelli from our psych class?" with a bunch of crying, laughing emojis. Then she pulled up my LinkedIn, which still had my real name, and a corporate headshot where you could kind of see my old features under all the changes. She'd done her research and connected all the dots. "I found this last week," she said quietly. "I've been waiting for you to tell me the truth." My mouth went completely dry, and I couldn't make any words come out no matter how hard I tried. I opened my mouth and closed it again like a fish gasping for air, while Hannah just sat there waiting for me to say something. My hands started shaking so bad I had to put them under my legs to make them stop. "I can explain," finally came out, but it sounded so weak and stupid that I wished I hadn't said anything at all. She stood up from the couch and walked over to the window with her back to me, and I could see her shoulders were rigid with anger. "I need you to leave," she said without turning around. "Come back tomorrow at noon and tell me everything. No more lies." Her voice was so cold and steady, it made my stomach drop. I grabbed my jacket and keys and stumbled toward the door, looking back once to see if she'd turn around, but she just kept staring out the window. The drive home was a blur, and I don't even remember how I got there or which streets I took. I sat in my car in the parking lot for 20 minutes before I could make myself go inside my apartment. Once I got in, I went straight to the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. The face looking back at me wasn't mine, and hadn't been for years. The narrow nose, the sharp jawline, the different eye shape, all of it was fake, and I'd done it to myself on purpose. I stood there for hours just looking at this stranger's face that I wore every day. Around 3 in the morning, I finally left the bathroom and grabbed my phone to text my parents. My fingers shook as I typed, asking if we could meet this weekend because I needed to talk to them about something important. My mom replied right away, even though it was the middle of the night, saying they'd been waiting for my call for over a year, and would I please come home? Something about the way she wrote it made me start crying so hard, I couldn't see the screen anymore. When the sun came up, I went through my apartment and deleted every social media account I had. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, TikTok, everything had to go. Then I grabbed all the Korean language books I'd been studying and threw them in a garbage bag along with the Korean movies and drama box sets I'd collected. None of it mattered anymore, now that Hannah knew the truth, and keeping it just felt like holding on to the lie. I pulled out my phone and messaged my old roommate begging him to take down the Reddit post about my BTS phase. He texted back with a bunch of laughing emojis saying it had been up for months and had thousands of upvotes on the cringe subreddit. He thought the whole thing was hilarious and couldn't understand why I was so upset about some old photos. I tried calling him, but he wouldn't pick up and just kept sending more laughing faces. At work, I sat at my desk staring at the computer screen, but couldn't focus on anything. My manager came over and asked if everything was okay, because I'd been sitting there for 2 hours without doing anything. I told her I was dealing with some family stuff, and she said I could leave early if I needed to. She didn't look like she believed me, but let me go anyway. I spent the rest of the morning writing pages and pages of notes trying to figure out how to explain everything to Hannah. I wrote down dates and timeline and tried to make it all make sense, but it just looked worse on paper. At exactly noon, I knocked on Hannah's door holding my stack of notes like they were some kind of shield. She opened the door, and I saw Soman sitting at the kitchen table, which caught me completely off guard because I thought it would just be the two of us. Soman looked at me with this mix of confusion and disgust on her face. Hannah told me everything, she said in English instead of the Korean greetings she'd always used before. I sat down across from them and started from the very beginning with my BTS obsession in college. I told them about watching every video and learning all the dances and how it turned into something bigger than just being a fan. Both women sat there listening without saying anything, while I explained how I'd saved up money for the surgeries and flew to Korea by myself to get them done. Soman kept shaking her head at certain parts like she couldn't believe what she was hearing. I reached into my backpack and pulled out my old student ID from freshman year, the one from before everything changed. My hands shook as I slid it across the table toward them. Soman picked it up first, and her eyes went wide, looking between the photo and my face now. She turned it toward Hannah, who covered her mouth with both hands. The person in that photo had a wider nose, stronger jawline, and completely different eyes. I looked like my dad in that picture, thick Italian features that I'd spent thousands of dollars erasing. Soman set the ID down carefully, like it might break. "You did this to yourself on purpose?" Her voice came out small and confused. I nodded and started explaining how after the surgeries, I'd gone to the Asian grocery store just to buy snacks, and the cashier had started speaking Korean to me. That moment felt like validation for all the pain and money I'd spent changing my face. When I matched with Hannah and she asked if I was Korean, saying yes felt easier than explaining the whole truth about my obsession and surgeries. The lie grew from there, creating a fake Korean name, making up stories about my family in Seoul, pretending not to speak Korean well because I'd been in America so long. Each new lie made the next one necessary, until I'd built this whole fake identity that took constant work to maintain. Hannah's expression got harder with every detail I shared. Her jaw tightened when I explained memorizing Korean food names from Wikipedia, and her fists clenched when I described practicing with chopsticks to hold them the right way. "Do you understand how messed up this is?" Her voice shook with anger now. "You let me introduce you to my family as Korean. They welcomed you into their homes." She stood up and paced to the window, then back to the table. Soman pulled out her phone and started scrolling through something before turning the screen toward me. An article about white people getting surgery to look Asian filled the screen. She swiped to another one about cultural appropriation and fetishization. "This is what you did. You turned our culture into a costume you could wear." I opened my mouth to apologize, but Hannah cut me off immediately. "I don't want apologies right now. I want you to understand the damage you've done. Not just to me, but to every Korean person you've lied to." She told me how her boss had pulled her aside after that holiday party to warn her something was wrong with me. The woman had noticed I moved wrong, spoke wrong, even held my chopsticks wrong despite my practice. Hannah had defended me to her boss, insisting I was just shy or maybe disconnected from Korean culture after living in America. The boss had shaken her head but dropped it out of respect for Hannah. Soman jumped in to add that people at the Korean market had been talking about me for months. The cashiers and regular customers all knew something was off, but figured I was just some white guy with an Asian fetish that Hannah was unfortunately dating. They'd felt bad for her, wondering why such a nice Korean girl was with someone so obviously not Korean, but trying so hard to pretend. One elderly woman had even asked Soman directly if Hannah knew her boyfriend wasn't really Korean. Soman had been confused at the time, but now it all made sense. The weight of it all pressed down on me like a physical force. All those times I thought I was fooling everyone, they'd actually been seeing right through me. The cooking class instructor who kept giving me strange looks. The restaurant owners who'd switched to English when I walked in. Hannah's relatives at family dinners, who'd exchange glances when I fumbled cultural references. They all knew, and I'd been too deep in my own delusion to see it. My face burned with shame, thinking about how stupid I must have looked to all of them. This obviously non-Korean person, desperately pretending to be something I wasn't. Hannah told me to leave, and said she'd text if she decided she wanted to talk more. I gathered my things slowly, hoping she might change her mind, but she just stared at the wall, refusing to look at me. As I walked toward my car, I heard footsteps behind me. Somin had followed me out. "You need serious help," she said firmly. "Normal people don't do what you did." She turned and went back inside before I could respond. I sat in my car for 20 minutes before I could drive, my hands shaking too badly to grip the steering wheel. That weekend, I finally drove the 3 hours to my parents' house, pulling into their driveway just as the sun was setting. I hadn't told them I was coming, but my mom must have been watching from the window because she opened the door before I could knock. The moment she saw my face up close for the first time since the surgeries, tears started rolling down her cheeks. She reached up to touch my cheek gently, like she was trying to find her son under all the changes. My dad came to the door, and I watched him struggle to look directly at my altered face. His eyes kept sliding away, like they couldn't quite focus on what I'd become. But then he stepped forward and pulled me into a tight hug anyway, and I felt myself starting to break down completely in their doorway. My mom led me inside to the kitchen, where she'd already set the table with all my favorite dishes from when I was a kid, the smell of her marinara sauce and fresh bread filling the whole house. She kept touching my face while we ate, her fingers tracing where my old jawline used to be, and I could see her trying not to cry every time she looked at me. "We miss our son's real face," she finally said, her voice breaking as she reached across the table to hold my hand. I told them everything about Hannah and the lies I'd been living for months, watching my dad's shoulders drop lower with each detail I shared. "We tried to warn you this would happen," he said, not sounding mad anymore, just tired and sad like he'd aged 10 years since I'd last seen him. My mom got up and pulled a folded piece of paper from the drawer by the phone, a list of therapist names she'd already looked up with their specialties circled in pen. She'd been researching people who work with identity issues, she explained, hoping I'd eventually come home and ask for help. I took the list and promised to call someone that week, then spent the rest of the weekend at their house trying to remember who I used to be before all the surgeries. Monday morning, I called the first name on the list and booked an appointment for Thursday, then spent the next 3 days wandering around my apartment, picking up and putting down the same Korean language books over and over. Without the fake identity I'd been wearing like armor, I felt completely empty, like there was nothing left underneath all the lies I'd been telling. My phone buzzed with a text from Hannah asking for the password to our shared Netflix account. Then another for Hulu. Then Disney Plus. Then all the food delivery apps we'd set up together. Each request felt like she was cutting another tie between us, removing every trace of me from her life, one subscription at a time. Thursday came, and I drove to Dr. Tao Chin's office in a strip mall between a nail salon and a tax place, sitting in the waiting room for 20 minutes before he called me in. He listened to my whole story without interrupting, just nodding and taking notes while I explained about the surgeries and the lies and how it all fell apart. "Why do you think your own identity wasn't enough?" he asked when I finished, and I realized I'd never actually thought about it that way before. He gave me homework before I left, telling me to write about my actual family background and cultural history, to research where my grandparents came from and what traditions they brought with them. It felt weird spending hours looking up Italian history and traditions with the same focus I'd once used for Korean culture. But this time, it was actually mine. Actually, real. Friday night, my phone lit up with another text from Hannah, this one longer than the others, saying she needed me to tell the truth to everyone we'd lied to together. She'd made a list of all the people who thought I was Korean because of me, including her family, the cooking class instructor, and various friends from her work. I started with the hardest one first, typing out an email to the Korean Community Center, explaining everything I'd done, and apologizing for taking up space meant for actual Korean Americans. Their response came back within hours, short and cold, saying I was no longer welcome at any of their events or classes going forward. Next, I wrote to Hannah's aunt, the one who'd cooked that huge Lunar New Year dinner, apologizing for lying at her table and disrespecting her home and hospitality. She never wrote back, but Hannah texted me later saying her whole family was hurt and angry, that her aunt felt personally betrayed by my deception. The cooking instructor from the community center actually did reply, writing in perfect English that she'd known something was wrong from the first class, but didn't want to embarrass Hannah. She hoped I would think about the harm cultural appropriation causes to immigrant communities trying to preserve their traditions in America. I wrote similar emails to a dozen other people over the next few days, each one making me feel smaller and more ashamed of what I'd done. Some people responded with anger, some with confusion, and many didn't respond at all, which somehow felt worse than the angry messages. Dr. Chin and I met again the next week and talked about my pattern of wanting to be someone else, going back to high school when I'd tried to dress like the popular kids. He helped me see that the surgeries were just the most extreme version of something I'd been doing my whole life, always running from myself. We talked about why being Italian American felt boring to me, why I thought I needed to be something exotic or different to be interesting or worth knowing. He asked me to bring in photos from before the surgeries for our next session, and looking through old pictures on my phone made me realize how much I'd changed. The person in those photos looked nothing like me now, but at least he looked like he belonged to my family, like he fit with my parents and cousins. Now when I stood next to them in pictures, I looked like some random Asian guy who'd wandered into the frame by accident. Sunday morning, my parents called to invite me to family dinner with all my aunts and uncles and cousins who I'd been avoiding for 3 years. My mom said everyone missed me and wanted to see me no matter what I looked like now. I knew word had spread about the surgeries through family gossip, but actually showing up would be different from them just hearing about it. The cooking instructor's email came that same afternoon while I was sitting in my car outside the grocery store. She wrote in perfect English that she'd suspected something was wrong from day one, but hadn't wanted to embarrass Hannah in front of the other students. She explained how spaces like the community center were created to help Korean immigrants preserve their culture and pass it on to their children. She said what I did was take up a spot that could have gone to someone actually trying to connect with their heritage. She hoped I would think about the real harm cultural appropriation causes to communities already struggling to maintain their traditions in America. Reading her words made me feel sick to my stomach because she was right about everything. I'd treated their culture like a costume I could put on and take off whenever I wanted. Tuesday, I had another appointment with Dr. Chin, and we spent the whole hour talking about my pattern of always wanting to be someone else. He pulled out notes from our previous sessions and showed me how even in high school I'd tried to copy the popular kids' style and mannerisms. He helped me see that the surgeries were just the most extreme version of something I'd been doing my whole life. We talked about why being myself never felt like enough, and why I thought I needed to be exotic or different, to be worth knowing. He asked me to think about what I was really running from when I decided to change my face. That Sunday, I drove to my parents' house for the family dinner, feeling like I was going to throw up the whole way there. My aunts and uncles tried not to stare when I walked in, but I could see the shock on their faces. My Uncle Tony actually gasped before catching himself, and my Aunt Maria kept touching her own face like she was trying to understand what I'd done to mine. Everyone was trying to be supportive, but the awkwardness was suffocating. My cousin Jeremy pulled me aside after dinner while everyone else was having coffee and dessert in the living room. He told me about his own struggles growing up mixed race and never feeling like he fit in anywhere. But then he looked at me with this sad expression and said, "The difference was that I had a choice about my identity. You chose to run from yourself," he said quietly. Not mean, but honest in a way that hurt worse than anger would have. He said I threw away something he would have given anything to have, which was knowing exactly where I came from and who my people were. Monday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Hannah asking me to come get my things from her apartment while she was at work. The key would be under the mat, and she wanted everything gone by 5 when she got home. I drove over Tuesday morning and let myself into the empty apartment that still smelled like her vanilla candles. My stuff was already sorted into boxes by the door, but I had to walk through the whole place to make sure I got everything. The Korean language books she'd bought me for my birthday were stacked on the coffee table with sticky notes marking the pages we'd studied together. The couple's cooking class certificate was still on the fridge next to a photo from our 6-month anniversary dinner. Every single item felt like evidence of my deception piling up around me. I found one of my hoodies in her bedroom closet and a phone charger behind her nightstand. Packing everything into my car took 3 trips, and each time I passed her neighbor who knew me as Joey the Korean guy, who helped carry her groceries once. I left her key on the kitchen counter with a letter I'd written the night before, taking full responsibility for everything. I didn't ask for forgiveness or try to explain myself anymore, because I knew I didn't deserve understanding yet. I just wrote that I was sorry for lying and for hurting her, and for making her question her own judgment about people. I told her she deserved someone who would be honest with her from the start. Wednesday evening, Soman texted me a photo of airplane tickets to Seoul, with a message saying she was taking Hannah on the Korea trip we'd planned together. She wanted me to know that Hannah would be experiencing the real culture I'd tried to steal, and meeting actual Korean people who could share their real stories. She said Hannah was excited about the trip, and starting to heal from what I'd done to her. The photo showed their seats next to each other, and the dates were exactly when Hannah and I were supposed to go. I started seeing Dr. Chin twice a week after that, because the identity crisis was getting worse, not better. He helped me understand that I'd been trying to escape feeling ordinary and invisible my whole life. We talked about how being Italian-American from a normal family felt boring to me compared to the international students I'd met in college. He made me realize I'd confused being different with being interesting and thought I needed an exotic identity to be worth knowing. During one session, he asked me to describe myself without mentioning my appearance or ethnicity, and I couldn't do it. I had no idea who Joey Marcelli actually was underneath all the lies and surgeries. Saturday afternoon, my mom brought out old photo albums from when I was a kid, and we sat on the couch going through them page by page. She showed me pictures from my first communion and Little League games and family vacations to the Jersey Shore. She told stories about each photo, trying to help me remember who I was before I got lost in wanting to be someone else. There was one picture of me at maybe 10 years old making pizza with my grandma in her kitchen. My mom started crying looking at it because she said my grandma would be heartbroken if she could see what I'd done to the face that looked just like my grandpa's when he was young. Monday morning at work, everyone already knew about the breakup because someone found my old roommate's Reddit post and shared it in the company's Slack. I walked into the break room and conversation stopped while people stared at my surgically altered face with new understanding. My manager pulled me into her office and asked if I needed time off to deal with personal issues, but I could tell she was more curious than concerned. The IT guy who sat next to me started calling me K-pop under his breath whenever I passed his desk. HR sent out a vague email about cultural sensitivity, but that just made things worse because now everyone was talking about it. I ate lunch in my car for the next 2 weeks and started looking at job listings in other cities. During my next session with Dr. Chin, I showed him apartments I'd found in Portland and Austin, but he pushed the laptop away and asked why I thought running would solve anything. He made me list all the times I tried to escape from problems instead of facing them, and the list filled 3 pages of his yellow notepad. We spent the whole hour talking about how I'd moved to Korea for surgeries instead of dealing with feeling boring, how I'd lied to Hannah instead of explaining my past, how I was ready to flee town instead of handling the gossip. 3 months crawled by and I forced myself to stay put and face the stares and whispers. My parents found an Italian-American club that met every Thursday at the community center and signed me up without asking. The first meeting was just old guys playing cards and talking about their grandkids, but they welcomed me anyway and taught me to play Scopa. I started going every week and learned about feast days and regional dialects and recipes their mothers brought from Sicily and Calabria. One Saturday I was buying groceries when I turned the corner and almost crashed my cart into Hannah's. She was holding a basket full of vegetables and her hair was shorter, and she looked good. Really good. Like the breakup had somehow made her stronger. We stood there frozen for a few seconds before she said hi and asked how I was doing. I told her about therapy and the Italian club, and she nodded and said she was glad I was getting help, but she wasn't ready to forgive me, and maybe never would be. She walked away, and I stood there holding a box of pasta for 5 minutes before I could move again. That Sunday, my dad called me over to help him make Sunday gravy, the way his mother taught him. He showed me how to brown the meat first, and layer the flavors, and let it simmer for hours while we played cards at the kitchen table. We made braciole and meatballs and sausages, and he told me stories about growing up in an Italian neighborhood in Newark, where everyone's grandmother cooked the same dishes, but swore theirs were the best. He taught me words in the Neapolitan dialect his parents spoke, and showed me how to roll cavatelli with a butter knife. We cooked together every Sunday after that, and it became the thing I looked forward to most each week. 6 weeks later, I was working on my laptop at a coffee shop when Soman walked in and saw me. I expected her to leave, but she actually came over and sat down across from me. She told me Hannah was dating someone new, a Korean-American teacher who coached soccer and was honest about everything from day one. She said Hannah was happier now, and going to therapy too, and learning to trust people again. I felt this weird mix of jealousy and relief, and told Samin I was happy Hannah found someone better. She laughed and said that wasn't hard to do considering how low I'd set the bar. That night I finally opened Reddit, and found my old roommate's post, which now had over 50,000 upvotes and hundreds of comments calling me every name imaginable. I typed out a long comment admitting everything, and apologizing to Hannah and the Korean community, and anyone else I'd hurt with my lies. The responses were brutal, and I read every single one, because I deserved to hear how messed up my actions were. People called me a fetishizer and culture vulture, and said I had serious mental problems, which wasn't wrong. Dr. Chin and I spent our sessions building my identity from scratch like I was a blank slate. We made lists of my actual interests, which turned out to be pretty normal stuff like hiking and cooking and old movies. We talked about my values and what mattered to me when I stripped away all the lies and pretending. It was slow work, and sometimes I felt like I was drowning in how ordinary I was, but he kept reminding me that being ordinary wasn't a crime. My relationship with my parents got better every week as we spent more time together without the weight of my lies between us. They still hated looking at my changed face, and my mom sometimes cried when she saw old photos, but they were learning to see past the surgeries to find pieces of their son still there. My dad started introducing me to his friends as his son, who was going through some stuff but was getting better. The college contacted me through LinkedIn, asking if I'd speak on a panel about cultural appropriation and identity. The thought of standing in front of students and admitting what I'd done made me want to throw up, but I said yes because it felt like something I needed to do. The panel was 3 weeks away, and I spent every night practicing what I'd say about how my obsession turned into appropriation and lies that hurt real people. The students stared at me from their seats while I stood there sweating through my shirt. I told them about flying to Korea with my college savings and sitting in that clinic waiting room surrounded by actual Korean people, getting minor procedures while I was there to change my whole face. The moderator asked me to explain the surgeries, and I described each one. The nose job that took away the bump I got from my dad's side of the family, the jaw shaving that hurt for weeks after, the eyelid surgery that made my mom cry when she saw the results. A student raised her hand and asked if I understood how racist it was, and I said yes, that I'd spent months in therapy learning exactly how messed up my actions were. After the panel, I drove straight to my parents' house where they were making Sunday dinner like always. My mom hugged me longer than usual, and my dad squeezed my shoulder while I helped set the table. We ate pasta and talked about normal stuff like my cousin's new baby and the neighbor's loud dog. 6 months had passed since Hannah left me standing in her apartment, and I was finally starting to feel like myself again. Or at least like Joey Marcelli from an Italian family in Jersey. I'd been saving money from my job to maybe reverse some of the surgeries, and had already met with 2 doctors who both said the same thing. They could do some work, but my face would never look exactly like before because bone doesn't grow back and scar tissue changes everything. My parents offered to help pay, and my mom kept saying she just wanted her son's real face back, even if it wasn't perfect. That same week, my phone buzzed with a text from Hannah saying she was moving to Seattle for a new teaching job. She thanked me for finally being honest and wished me luck finding myself, then blocked my number before I could respond. I stared at that message for an hour before deleting it and going to my weekly therapy appointment where we talked about letting go of things I couldn't fix. I'd started going to the Italian-American club my parents belonged to and was taking cooking classes from this old guy who'd owned a restaurant in Newark for 30 years. He taught me how to make gravy the right way and told stories about his grandparents coming over from Sicily. My family started inviting me to everything again, birthdays and baptisms and random Tuesday dinners. My aunts would still stare at my face sometimes, but they'd gotten better at looking past it to see their nephew underneath. The surgeries were always there when I looked in the mirror, this permanent reminder of my mistakes that I was learning to live with. Some mornings I'd trace the scars and think about all the people I'd hurt pretending to be someone else. At the Italian club's monthly dinner, I was helping serve food when this woman named Kana walked up and asked if I was new. She had dark hair and a nice smile and worked as a nurse at the hospital downtown. We talked while cleaning up, and she asked if I wanted to get coffee sometime. On our first date at this little place near the park, I told her everything right away. About the surgeries and lying to Hannah and pretending to be Korean and the whole embarrassing mess. She listened without interrupting, then said she appreciated me being upfront about it. We took things really slow, just coffee dates and walks for the first month, while she processed what I'd told her. She had questions about why I did it, and I tried to answer as honestly as I could, even when it made me look terrible. Her parents were Filipino and Italian, so she understood complicated identity stuff, but said mine was definitely the wildest story she'd heard. We kept seeing each other, and she introduced me to her friends as Joey, who was working through some stuff. A whole year had passed since Hannah found out the truth, and I was still in therapy, but doing way better. I'd made actual friends at the Italian club and at work who knew my real story and still wanted to hang out. My therapist said I'd made more progress than most of his patients, and we'd moved to monthly sessions instead of weekly. I helped my dad fix up his garage and learned about cars, which was something we'd never done together before. My mom taught me to make her grandmother's wedding cookies, and we spent Saturday afternoons baking while she told me family stories I'd never paid attention to before. I ran into Soman at the grocery store, and she actually smiled and said hi, then told me Hannah was doing great in Seattle with her new boyfriend. My life was definitely smaller now without all the lies and pretending, but it was real, and that was enough. I was just Joey from an Italian family in Jersey who made terrible choices and was working every day to be better than the person who thought he needed surgery to be interesting. Thanks for hanging out with me on this one. It's been a ride, and I'm glad we got to share these moments together. I'll catch you in the next one. If you made it to the end, drop a comment. I love reading all your comments.